Elias stood in the center of the marble hallway. He stared at the small, ragged bag on the floor. His finger pointed directly at the heavy oak door. "Get out, Hattie. My house is not a place for the lazy." The old woman didn't move. Her gray hair was messy. Her hands were stained with dark grease. She didn't beg. She didn't even look up. Elias threw a crumpled $100 bill at her feet. It landed near her worn-out shoes. "Take it. It's more than you earned." Hattie slowly picked up the money. Her eyes were tired, but she didn't put it in her pockets. She tucked it inside a hospital bill hidden in her sleeve. Elias froze. Why was his mother's name written on that paper in red ink? Hattie turned toward the rain without a word. The door slammed shut. Elias felt his chest tighten. Something was very wrong. He looked at the floor. A small, golden key sat where she had just stood. It wasn't a house key. It was a locker key from the city's largest medical center. He picked it up. His hands started to shake. What had he just done? Elias stood by the window, watching Mrs. Hattie disappear into the heavy gray rain. The golden key felt ice cold in his palm. He tried to shake off the feeling in his gut. He told himself he was right. She was slow. She was always tired. A house like this needed energy, not an old woman who moved like a shadow. He walked back into the kitchen to pour a drink, but he stopped at the counter. It was spotless, usually. He would find a reason to complain, but today, everything was too perfect. Then he saw it. A small plastic container sat near the sink. Inside were 3 dry crusts of bread and a half-eaten apple. That was her lunch. Elias frowned. He paid her enough for a feast, so why was she eating like a beggar in his mansion? He moved toward the small room near the laundry where Mrs. Hattie slept. He had never stepped inside before. The door creaked open. The room was freezing. The heater was turned off, saved for another time. There was no television, no books, nothing but a narrow bed and a single wooden chair. On the chair sat a small, battered notebook. Elias hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a log. Page after page was filled with numbers. $20, $50, $100. Every single cent she earned from him was listed. But next to each amount was a deduction. Rent, no. Food, no. Every dollar was marked with the initials SB. Simone Bennett. His mother's name. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the last entry from yesterday. It said final payment needed, $80,000. Sold the ring today. Elias gripped the notebook so hard the paper wrinkled. His mother was in the best private hospital in the city. He handled the bills, or at least, he thought he did. He checked his banking app. The automatic payments for the hospital were there, but they were all marked as returned account overdrawn. He hadn't checked his personal account in months. He was too busy. If his payments were failing, who had been keeping his mother in that room? He looked back at the golden key. It had a number engraved on the back, 402. That wasn't a locker number. It was a room number. His mother's room. He grabbed his coat and ran to his car. His heart hammered against his ribs. Why would a maid have a private key to a restricted medical wing? And what did she mean by sold the ring? Mrs. Hattie didn't wear jewelry. Except for one thing. Elias remembered a thin, gold band she used to wear on a string around her neck. She called it her life insurance. As he sped toward the hospital, his phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. "Mr. Bennett," a voice crackled. "This is St. Jude's Medical. We've been trying to reach you. Your mother's surgery was moved up to tonight. The donor is ready." Elias gripped the steering wheel. "Donor? What donor? I haven't cleared any surgery." "Sir." The voice sounded confused. "The woman who was here an hour ago. She already signed the consent forms. She said she was the only family your mother had left." Elias slammed his foot on the gas. The luxury SUV roared, but inside, the silence felt heavy. He looked at his own reflection in the rearview mirror. He was wearing a suit that cost $3,000. His watch was worth more than a small house. He was a man of power, a man who gave orders, yet, as he neared the hospital, he realized he didn't even know his own mother's balance sheet. He arrived at St. Jude's and marched through the glass doors. The lobby was filled with soft piano music and the scent of expensive lilies. This was a place for the elite. He reached the front desk and slapped his black credit card onto the marble top. Elias Bennett. I'm here for Simone Bennett, room 402. The receptionist didn't look at the card. She looked at her screen and then back at him with a strange, cold expression. Mr. Bennett, your account was flagged for non-payment 3 months ago. Elias felt his face flush with heat. That's impossible. Check it again. I have more money in one account than this building is worth. Money isn't the issue now, sir, she replied softly. The bills were settled. Every single one. But not by you. She pointed toward a small waiting area near the elevators. Elias turned and stopped dead. There, sitting on a velvet chair, was a man he recognized. It was Mr. Henderson, the city's most ruthless debt collector. Beside him sat a small, battered cardboard box. It was the same box Elias had seen Mrs. Hattie carrying many times. Elias walked over, his leather shoes clicking loudly. Henderson, what are you doing at my mother's hospital? The man looked up and smiled thinly. It wasn't a friendly smile. I'm waiting for the collateral, Elias. A deal is a deal. What deal? What collateral? Elias demanded. Henderson tapped the cardboard box. The old lady's. She couldn't pay the interest on the last $40,000, so she signed over the only thing she had left of value. Elias reached down and pulled back the lid of the box. His breath hitched. Inside wasn't money. It was a stack of old, yellowed envelopes. On the top envelope, in his father's handwriting, were the words, "To Hattie, my greatest mistake and my only truth." Elias grabbed the envelope, but Henderson's hand clamped down on his wrist. Not yet, kid. That belongs to me now. Unless you have the 80,000 she promised by midnight. Elias looked at the clock. It was 11:15 p.m. He reached for his phone to transfer the funds, but a new notification popped up. His business partner had just sent an urgent message. Elias, don't use the accounts. The auditors are here. Everything is frozen. The world seemed to tilt. Elias looked from the debt collector to the elevator leading to his mother's room. Mrs. Hattie had signed the consent forms. She was the only family, and now, Elias realized the golden key in his pocket didn't just open a room. It opened a safe. A safe his father had hidden in that hospital room 30 years ago. A safe only Hattie knew how to find. Suddenly, the elevator doors opened. A nurse ran out, her face pale. Mr. Bennett, you need to come now. Mrs. Hattie. She's not in the waiting room. She's in the operating theater. She's the donor. Elias felt the floor dissolve beneath his feet. The word donor rang in his ears like a funeral bell. He pushed past the nurse and ran toward the double doors of the surgical wing. His expensive shoes skidded on the polished floor. Through the small glass window of operating room 3, he saw a team of doctors moving quickly. On the table lay a small, frail figure. Even under the surgical lights and blue drapes, he recognized the worn, calloused hand hanging off the side. It was Mrs. Hattie. Stop, Elias screamed, but his voice was muffled by the thick glass. A security guard grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Sir, you can't be in here. This is a private procedure. That's my maid, Elias barked, his eyes wide with terror. She's not family. You can't take her organs. The head nurse stepped forward, holding a legal folder. She looked at Elias with a mixture of pity and disgust. She isn't just your maid, Mr. Bennett. She's the legal guardian of your mother's medical trust. And she isn't donating an organ. She's donating her heart. Elias froze. His breath stopped. Her heart. That's suicide. That's illegal. It's a directed donation, sir. The nurse whispered. She signed the papers months ago. She said her life was over, but Simone's was just beginning. She waited until the final payment was made tonight. The $100 you threw at her feet was the last bit she needed to cover the processing fee. Elias looked at the $100 bill, now crumpled in the nurse's hand. He felt a sharp pain in his chest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the golden key. It was trembling in his hand. He looked at the nurse, then at the debt collector Henderson, who was still standing by the elevator, watching with a cold grin. The safe. Elias gasped. What is in room 402? The nurse lowered her voice. The safe isn't for money, Elias. It's for the truth your father buried. But to open it, you need more than a key. You need a blood match. And the only person with that blood is currently on that table, giving her life for your mother. Elias realized the horrifying truth. If Mrs. Hattie died on that table, the secret of his father's greatest mistake would be locked away forever. And he would be the man who murdered the only person who actually loved his family. Elias watched as the surgeon picked up a scalpel. He had to stop this. But as he tried to lunge forward, the lights in the hospital flickered and died. The backup generators kicked in, but the heart monitor inside the room emitted a long, flat beep. It's heart-wrenching to see how a moment of pride can destroy a lifetime of sacrifice. If you believe Elias deserves a chance to fix his mistake, please like this video and subscribe to stay with us until the end. We want to know our community better. Where are you watching from? New York, South Africa, or maybe London? Tell us in the comments below. The long, flat beep echoed through the hallway. Elias felt the air leave his lungs. He lunged at the heavy double doors, throwing his entire weight against them. Stop the surgery. Open the doors, he roared, his voice cracking. The security guard tackled him, pinning him to the floor, but Elias fought like a cornered animal. He didn't care about his expensive suit. He didn't care about the people watching. She's not a donor. She's my mother's friend, Elias screamed. His face was bright red. Veins popped on his forehead. You can't let her do this. I'll pay anything. I'll give you all my restaurants. The nurse who had been holding the folder knelt down. Her eyes weren't cold anymore. They were filled with a terrifying truth. Mr. Bennett, look at the screen. Elias looked up through the glass. The surgical team wasn't panicking. They weren't trying to restart a heart. They were looking at a monitor that showed two separate heartbeats, perfectly synchronized. One was frail. The other was strong. They haven't started yet. The nurse whispered. The flat beep wasn't from her. It was from your mother's room, room 402. Elias stopped struggling. His body went limp. He pulled the golden key out of his pocket. It felt like it was burning his skin. If the beep came from his mother's room, it meant she was crashing. But the doctors were all in here, preparing to take Hattie's heart. Why aren't they helping her? Elias gasped, grabbing the guard's shirt. My mother is dying in 402. Why are they standing here? The nurse stood up and pointed to the golden key. Because that key doesn't just open a safe, Elias. It's a remote override. Your father designed this wing. He built that room. Your mother's life support is linked to that key. Elias stared at the small piece of metal. His father had been an engineer, a man of secrets and complex locks. He realized that by holding the key, he was the one controlling the power to his mother's bed. But there was a catch. He looked at the keypad next to the door of room 402. It wasn't a number pad. It was a glass plate for a fingerprint. Or something else. The blood match, Elias whispered. He looked at Hattie on the operating table. He looked at his own hands. Suddenly, the door to the operating room opened. A doctor stepped out, his gown covered in old, dried stains. He wasn't wearing a mask. He looked exactly like Elias' father, who had been dead for 10 years. The man walked toward Elias and reached for the key. You're late, son. And you still don't know who that woman really is. Elias pulled back, his hand trembling as he gripped the golden key. The man standing before him had his father's eyes, but his skin was weathered, his voice raspy like dry leaves. Before Elias could speak, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. A group of people turned the corner. It was his aunt, his cousins, and a few investors from his restaurant group. They weren't there to comfort him. They were holding tablets and legal documents. Elias, what is the meaning of this? His aunt shouted, her voice cutting through the sterile silence. She pointed a manicured finger at the surgical wing. We just got a notification from the bank. The family estate has been liquidated, and the hospital says a maid is making executive decisions for Simone. The investors stepped forward, their faces cold and calculating. The board is calling for your resignation, Elias. You've let your personal life destroy the company's reputation. People are saying you've been funneling money to a woman who isn't even your mother. Elias stood there paralyzed. He was trapped between the operating room and a crowd of people who only cared about his money. He looked at the man who looked like his father. The stranger didn't blink. He just watched the chaos with a grim smile. Tell them, Elias, the man said quietly. Tell them who Hattie really is. Tell them why she has been working for pennies in your house while paying $80,000 in medical bills. Elias opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at his aunt, then back at the glass window where Hattie lay. The crowd began to murmur. Someone pulled out a phone and started recording. Look at him, a cousin sneered. He's lost it. He's fired the only person who actually kept this family together. And now he's standing here with a stolen key. The security guards stepped in closer. The pressure was suffocating. Elias felt the weight of every lie he had ever told himself. He looked down at the golden key. It was then he noticed something he had missed before. Inside the small loop of the key was a tiny, engraved date. It was 9 months before his own birth. Suddenly, the doctor, the man who shouldn't be alive, grabbed Elias by the collar. He leaned in, his breath smelling of old tobacco and medicine. The blood match isn't for the doorboy. It's for the heart. Your mother's heart is failing because she's waiting for the truth. And Hattie is the only one who can give it to her. He shoved Elias toward the crowd. Choose, son, your empire, or the truth that will burn it all down. The crowd closed in on Elias. Their voices were a blur of accusations and greed. Elias looked at the golden key in his palm. The date engraved on it burned into his mind. 9 months before his birth. He looked at the stranger who claimed to be a doctor. He looked at the surgical wing where Hattie lay. Suddenly, a dark thought took root in his mind. It twisted everything he had just seen. He didn't see sacrifice anymore. He saw a long, calculated game. I get it now, Elias whispered. His voice grew louder, sharper. He turned to his aunt and the investors. She didn't pay those bills out of the kindness of her heart. She was paying for her own guilt. He pointed the golden key at the operating room glass. My father didn't leave this to her because she was loyal. He left it because she was the reason he lost everything. The crowd went silent. The investors lined in, their eyes gleaming. Elias felt a surge of cold rage. He remembered the greasy stains on Hattie's hands. He remembered her sleeping at the kitchen table. He didn't see a saint anymore. He saw a woman who had infiltrated his home to hide a crime from 30 years ago. She's been paying the hospital to keep my mother alive, Elias shouted, not because she loves her, but because she's terrified of what my mother will say when she wakes up. He turned back to the mysterious doctor, and you're part of it. You're not here to save anyone. You're here to finish what was started 3 decades ago. Elias grabbed the legal documents from his aunt's hand. He began to tear them into pieces. He didn't want the truth. He wanted revenge. He believed Hattie had caused the accident that killed his father. He believed the $80,000 was blood money, stolen from his father's secret accounts. The doctor shook his head slowly. He reached into his stained lab coat and pulled out a small, blue silk pouch. He tossed it at Elia's feet. Elias didn't pick it up. He kicked it away. I'm calling the police. I'm stopping this transplant. I won't let a murderer put her heart into my mother. But as he reached for his phone, a loud crash came from inside room 402. The heavy oak door, the one that required the golden keys, had been forced open from the inside. A woman stood in the doorway. She was pale, her hospital gown fluttering in the draft. It was Simone, his mother. She wasn't unconscious. She was standing on her own feet. She looked at Elias, then at the doctor, and finally at the closed doors of the operating room. Elias, she rasped. Her voice sounded like it was coming from a grave. Give me the key. You have no idea what your father did to that woman. Elias stared at his mother. His jaw tightened until it hurt. He didn't see a woman who had been saved. He saw a victim of a deep manipulation. He gripped the golden key so hard his knuckles turned white. No, Mom, Elias snapped. She's got you under some kind of spell. She's been living in our house, eating our food, while she plotted this. He turned away from his mother and looked at the head nurse. I am the next of kin. My mother is clearly not in her right mind. Stop that surgery now. I want Hattie removed from this building immediately. The nurse shook her head. Mr. Bennett, the procedure has already been initiated. We can't just stop. I said stop it, Elias roared. He reached out and grabbed the emergency shutoff lever near the door. He didn't wait for a doctor. He didn't ask about the consequences. He pulled the lever down with a violent jerk. Alarms began to scream throughout the wing. Red lights flashed against the white walls. Inside the operating room, the machines hissed and went dark. The surgeons froze, their hands hovering over Hattie's still body. Elias felt a surge of dark triumph. There, it's over. No more lies. He walked toward the operating room door and kicked it open. He marched straight to the table where Hattie lay. Her face was gray. Her breathing was shallow. He grabbed her shoulder and shook her. Wake up. Your little game is finished. Get out of my mother's life. His mother let out a strangled cry from the doorway. Elias, stop. You don't understand. Elias ignored her. He saw the blue silk pouch on the floor. He picked it up and ripped it open. He expected to find stolen jewelry or bank codes. Instead, out fell a small, tarnished silver dog tag. It didn't have his father's name on it. It had a name Elias had never heard before. Elias threw the tag at Hattie's face. Who is this? Another one of your victims. The mysterious doctor stepped into the room. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated. He picked up the dog tag and held it to the lights. That belongs to Hattie's son Elias, the son your father killed 30 years ago to protect your name. Elias froze. His hand was still on Hattie's shoulder. He felt a sudden, sharp coldness beneath his palm. Hattie's skin wasn't just pale anymore. It was turning blue. The heart monitor behind him started to beep again. But it wasn't a steady rhythm. It was a chaotic, dying pulse. Elias looked at the lever he had just pulled. A small screen above it flickered to life. It showed a warning in bold, black letters: override incomplete. System failure. Life support terminated for all linked units. Elias looked at Hattie. Then he looked at his mother. Simone was clutching her chest, her eyes rolling back into her head. By stopping Hattie's surgery, Elias hadn't saved anyone. He had just turned off the only thing keeping both women alive. The doctor grabbed Elias by the arm. You wanted the truth, boy. Well, look at it. You just killed them both. Elias watched in horror as his mother collapsed against the doorframe. The sound of her body hitting the floor was louder than the alarms. He tried to move, but his legs felt like lead. The medical team ignored him now. They scrambled between the two women, their voices urgent and sharp. Flatline on bed 1. Bed 2 is fading, a nurse yelled. Elias looked at his hands. The same hands that had built an empire had just destroyed his world. He had pulled that lever to prove he was in control. Now, he was watching the two people who truly mattered slip away. The mysterious doctor didn't help. He stood by the window, clutching the silver dog tag. He looked at Elias with eyes full of ancient grief. 30 years ago, your father was driving drunk. The man whispered. He hit a young boy on a bicycle. Hattie's only son. Your father didn't go to jail, Elias. He used his money to bury the truth so you could have a clean future. Elias shook his head, backing away. No. My father was a good man. He was a hero. He was a coward, the doctor replied. And Hattie knew it. But she didn't call the police. She didn't sue. Your father begged her for mercy. He promised to take care of her forever, but he died and you treated her like trash. Outside the glass, the crowd of investors was still filming. They weren't horrified. They were whispering about stock prices and brand damage. His aunt was on the phone, already talking to lawyers about his mother's estate. To them, Elias was already a ghost. He was a man who had just committed a public, televised mistake that no amount of money could fix. Elias turned back to Hattie. Her eyes fluttered open for a brief second. She wasn't looking at the doctors. She was looking at the small, golden key that had fallen from Elias' hand. With her last bit of strength, she pointed a trembling finger toward the ventilation vent above his mother's bed. "Those second box," she gasped. Then, her hand fell limp. The monitor in the room let out a long, continuous tone. The doctor walked over and pulled the white sheet over Hattie's face. "She's gone," he said. Elias felt a cold darkness swallow him. He looked at the vent Hattie had pointed to. If she had been paying the bills for years, and his father was a coward, what else was hidden in those walls? And why did Hattie wait until her very last breath to show him? Elias stood frozen as the nurses pulled the white sheet over Mrs. Hattie's face. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the frantic beeps from his mother's side of the ward. He looked at the ventilation vent Hattie had pointed to before her last breath. His hands shook as he dragged a heavy medical stool toward the wall. He climbed up and reached into the dark gap of the vent. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a heavy, rusted iron box. It looked like it had been hidden there for decades. Elias slumped to the floor, clutching the box. He used the golden key. It turned with a sharp click. Inside were not gold or diamonds. There was a stack of legal transcripts and a small, cracked voice recorder. He pressed play. A voice filled the room. It was his father's voice, but he sounded terrified. "Simone, if you're hearing this, I've done something unforgivable. I didn't just hit that boy. I let Hattie take the blame. I paid the judge to say she was the one driving the car. She went to prison for 3 years for a crime I committed." Elias felt the world tilt. Everything he knew was a lie. Hattie hadn't just been a maid. She had been his father's scapegoat. She had lost her son, her freedom, and her reputation to save the Bennett name. He dug deeper into the box. At the bottom was a life insurance policy. It was in Hattie's name, but the beneficiary wasn't her son. It was Elias. A small note fell out. It was written in Hattie's neat, cramped handwriting. "Elias, I worked for you so I could watch you grow. I paid your mother's bills because she was the only one who tried to stop your father that night. Don't be like him, be better." Elias looked at his mother. Her eyes were open now, staring at him through the oxygen mask. She was crying. She had known the truth all along, but she was too afraid to speak. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the hallway. The investors and his aunt were pushing past the security guards. They had a man in a black suit with them. "Elias Bennett," the man shouted, flashing a badge. "You're under investigation for corporate fraud and medical endangerment. Step away from that box." Elias gripped the recordings. He realized the box didn't just contain his father's confession. It contained the proof that his aunt and the investors had been using his father's secret to blackmail Hattie for years. But as the police moved in, the doctor, the man who looked like his father, grabbed Elias by the shoulder. "The recording isn't finished, boy. Listen to the very end." The voice on the recorder changed. It wasn't his father anymore. It was a younger Mrs. Hattie. "I don't want the money, Bennett. I want the other child. The one you stole from the hospital." Elias stopped breathing. He looked at his mother. Then he looked at the sheet covering Hattie. "Who am I?" Elias whispered. The room went deathly silent. Elias stared at the woman under the white sheet. His heart felt like it was being crushed by a giant hand. The voice on the recorder was still playing, but Elias could only hear the blood rushing in his ears. He looked at Simone, the woman he had called mother his entire life. She turned her face away, sobbing into her pillow. The police officer grabbed Elias' arm, but Elias didn't fight. He didn't care about the handcuffs. He didn't care about the investors shouting about his downfall. He looked at the doctor who stood by the bed. "Is it true?" Elias whispered. His voice was barely a ghost of a sound. "Was I the boy on the bicycle?" The doctor didn't answer. He simply reached out and pulled the sheet back from Hattie's face one last time. He pointed to a small, faint scar just below her ear. Elias touched his own neck. He felt the exact same mark. A scar he had been told came from a childhood fall. Elias fell to his knees beside Hattie's body. He grabbed her cold, rough hand. The same hand he had called dirty and greasy. He pressed it against his forehead and wept. He wasn't crying for his lost empire. He was crying for the 30 years she had spent serving him in silence. She had watched her own son be raised by the man who killed her life, just so she could be near him. "I'm sorry," Elias choked out. "I'm so sorry, Hattie." He stood up and turned toward the investigators and his aunt. His eyes were no longer filled with fear. They were filled with a cold, sharp fire. He held up the iron box. "You wanted this box," Elias said to his aunt. She flinched, her face turning pale. "You've been using this secret to bleed Hattie dry for years. You made her work like a slave while you stole the money my father set aside for her." His aunt tried to speak, but Elias stepped closer. "The police are here for me, Auntie. But they aren't leaving without you. I'm confessing to everything, and I'm taking every single one of you down with me." He handed the voice recorder to the late officer. "There is a second recording. It's not in the box. It's in the golden key." Elias pressed a tiny hidden button on the head of the key. A small compartment slid open. Inside was a micro SD card. Hattie knew this day would come, Elias said. She recorded every single blackmail call you ever made. But as the officers moved to arrest his aunt, the heart monitor next to Simone began to flatline again. The doctor grabbed Elias' shoulder. "There's no more time for talk. Hattie's heart is still viable. But the blood match. We need to know for sure." The doctor pulled a syringe from his pocket. "Elias, if you are who I think you are, your blood won't just open a safe. It will save the woman who raised you. But you have to choose now. To save Simone, you have to admit Hattie is your mother in front of the world." Elias looked at the cameras. He looked at the police. He knew that admitting the truth would mean losing his identity, his legal name, and his inheritance forever. He rolled up his sleeve. "Do it," he said. The doctor inserted the needle. But as the blood filled the tube, the color wasn't red. It was a dark, shimmering purple. The doctor froze. "This isn't possible. This blood, it doesn't belong to any human in this room." The doctor dropped the syringe. It shattered against the white tile floor. The dark, purple liquid pooled around his shoes. Elias stared at the stain, his mind racing. "What do you mean? It doesn't belong here," he gasped. His voice was trembling. The doctor didn't answer. He turned and looked at the heart monitor connected to Simone. The beep was becoming a flat, endless line. "The blood isn't blood, Elias," the doctor whispered. It's a chemical. A preservative. He grabbed Elia's arm and looked at the puncture site. There was no hole. No blood was leaking out. Elias looked at his own arm and felt a cold wave of realization. He reached up to his face and rubbed his skin. A thin, rubbery layer began to peel away. I'm not Elias, he whispered. He stood up and looked at his aunt. She was backed against the wall, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. You were supposed to be in Geneva. Well, she stammered. The man who looked like Elias peeled the mask completely off. Underneath was a face that was older, scarred, and filled with a terrifying calm. This was the boy on the bicycle. This was Hattie's son alive. He walked over to the operating table and looked down at Hattie. She knew. He said softly. She knew I was coming back to finish this. He turned to the police officers. The real Elias Bennett died in that accident 30 years ago. My mother didn't go to jail for a crime she committed. She went to jail to protect a lie. The Bennett family needed an heir, so they took me. They changed my face. They gave me a new name. And they kept my mother as a maid so she could never tell the truth. The aunt lunged for the iron box, but the man caught her. He squeezed her wrist until she screamed. The blackmail wasn't about the accident. It was about me. You told her if she ever spoke the truth, you would kill me. He looked at Simone, who was gasping for air. But you didn't know one thing. My mother wasn't paying for the hospital. She was paying for the poison. He pointed to the IV bag connected to Simone's arm. The liquid inside was the same dark, shimmering purple. She wasn't giving her heart to save you, Simone, the man said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. She was waiting for the moment I arrived to watch you both die together. Suddenly, the hospital doors burst open. A team of men in hazmat suits rushed in. They weren't doctors. They were wearing the logo of the Bennett Corporation's Secret Research Division. One of them pointed a weapon at Hattie's son. The experiment is over. Give us the box, and no one else has to die. Hattie's son laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second golden key. You're too late, he said. The box is empty. The real truth is already being broadcasted to every screen in the city. He looked at the window. Across the street, a giant digital billboard flickered. A video began to play. It was his father, but he wasn't alone. He was standing in a lab, holding a newborn baby. The baby isn't mine. His father's voice boomed over the speakers. And it isn't Hattie's. We found it in the crash. But it wasn't a car crash. The voice on the giant screen cracked like thunder. The object we recovered. It didn't come from this world. The men in hazmat suits froze. Their weapons lowered as the entire city watched the secret they had guarded for 30 years spill out like blood. Hattie's son looked at the monitor one last time. He reached down and gently closed his mother's eyes. She was gone, but she had died knowing the truth was free. He turned to the aunt and the investors. They weren't powerful anymore. They were just small, terrified people trapped in a room with their crimes. Police sirens wailed outside. Hundreds of them. But they weren't coming for the man with the scarred face. They were coming for the ones who had turned a tragedy into an experiment. The man walked towards Simone's bed. She was barely breathing. The purple liquid had stopped flowing. He reached out and touched her hand. Not with hate, but with a strange, heavy pity. You spent 30 years living a lie. He whispered. You lived in a palace built on the bones of a child. Now, you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell remembering his name. He picked up the iron box and the golden key. He walked past the men in hazmat suits. They didn't stop him. They couldn't. The world was watching. He stepped out of the hospital and into the rain. It was the same cold, gray rain that had washed over Mrs. Hattie when he fired her just a few hours ago. He walked to the hospital garden and sat on a wooden bench. He opened the iron box. There was one last item at the very bottom, a small, hand-knitted baby blanket. It was blue, and sewn into the corner was a name that wasn't Elia's. He looked at the digital billboard across the street. The video was looping. It showed the crash site. There was no car, only a trail of fire and a metal shell that looked like nothing from Earth. The man pulled a small locket from his neck. Inside was a photo of the real Hattie, young and smiling. He realized then that she hadn't been his mother. She had been his protector. She had found him in that fire and claimed him as her own to keep him out of a lab. He stood up and walked toward the shadows. The mystery of the Bennett family was over. But as he looked up at the stars, he saw a small, pulsing light moving in the clouds. It was a sign that some secrets don't stay buried, and some families aren't found in blood, but in the sacrifices they make in the dark. Every act of kindness is a seed planted for a future we might never see. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to join our community. What would you do if you discovered your whole life was built on a lie? Share your thoughts below.